everyone, and welcome to our live stream on FortiEDR, the last barrier against ransomware. I'm really excited to welcome our speakers today, Andres Ruz, Director of Information Security with Meriplex, Andy Crocker, Solutions Architect with Fortinet, and Larry Holmes, Director of Endpoint at Fortinet. Andy, ready to kick us off?
Thank you, Macy, and very happy to be here with my partner in crime, Andy Crocker and Larry. We have been having meetings with these guys almost every single week. My wife very soon is going to ask me who you are, but for now she's not asking me so far. So very excited to talk about FortiEDR. Is honestly, I was speaking with a customer today. This is probably the product that we have been offering and selling more than anything else that we have in our security portfolio. And I think that this is an important conversation that we're going to start today. So the agenda for today, we're going to talk about a little bit on the evolution of the endpoint protection and how EDR comes to play here. Then we're going to talk about ransomware on a slide that if you have participated on the videos that we do, you have already seen. And then we're going to go to a little bit of detail about how FortiEDR can help your organization, can help against those ransomware. And we're going to close with some takeaways. And without, my friend Andy, all yours.
Perfect. So what's interesting about endpoint protection, and I'm going to even be more specific, because in March of this year, as COVID hit, more and more businesses were sending their employees home. It's interesting that I think more employees have worked from home than ever before. I know a lot of people a lot of businesses I know are still working from home. They haven't gone back. And because of that, the numbers have drastically just gone up with the number of attacks. I actually was reading this morning on a recent report from the SANS Institute that said that in 2019, it was over 68% of the endpoints were attacked or compromised. That's way up from what it was in 2016 and even 2017. And what's scary about it is that a lot of times it's known vulnerabilities. Number two, because it's all the malware that's out there. And because people are not really paying attention, because people are working from home, whether it's employee-based laptops or employer-based laptops, both are kind of in the same percentage of being attacked and being compromised. So endpoints are a major point of target for all the cyber criminals out there, and they know it. They know they're vulnerable, and they know they're going to be attacked. So having said that, let's go to the next slide. Let's talk a little bit about kind of the differences. And Andy, you and I have talked about this a lot. When you think about that endpoint protection, right? So EPP has been around, right? And it's a great product. It's a great thing to do. But endpoint protection is either using signatures or it's using next-gen AV. And the endpoint's going to give you some vulnerability patching. It's going to give you some web application protection and guidance and set some policies around it, even some application control. It's going to provide you some VPN capabilities, but it's at a low level. And EPP or endpoint protection is great, right? But the problem is, what if it's a fileless attack? How do you actually mitigate that? How do you detect that? And again, looking at some statistics this morning, the average time to detect anything is usually around 24 hours. Now, Andy, I don't know about you, and Larry, I'll throw you in on this too, but that's kind of frightening if you think about It takes 24 hours to discover my device has been attacked.
And that's probably for known. That's probably for known types of threats, right?
Correct.
The unknowns are probably sitting out there much longer, you know.
Yeah, the statistics pointed out that sometimes it's up to a year before it's actually known. And I know, Larry, you're going to talk about that a little bit more in detail in a few minutes, but as I think about the evolution, and even this article that I was reading this morning, the latest SANS report was indicating that endpoint protection, while it was good and still has its value today, I mean, I don't want to mislead anybody, the EDR or the endpoint detection and response has become even more important because now, instead of just looking at known signatures or known threats, and I know, Larry, you're going to go into this in detail, I can actually, with the EDR or endpoint detection response, I'm looking more at the behaviors I'm observing what's going on and what's happening. And if I'm looking at a behavior and it's like, wow, something's a little odd there. I want to take a deeper look, or I want to prevent that while still allowing that end user to keep doing the things they should be doing. And I think that when you start looking at not only observing the behaviors, but being able to remediate that immediately, cutting down on that time frame between detection and remediation from 24 hours to a year, even less, to within, Larry, what would you say, within minutes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, seconds. Yeah.
Seconds. I would say
And
seconds.
even seconds. Yeah. I mean, to me, that's where you really start thinking about what is it that I need. Now, I want to also be clear, and Andy and Larry, I want your input on this. Not everybody needs endpoint or a full-blown EDR.
True.
Let's be honest. Some people don't. There are cases where
especially the traditional ones, right?
Yeah, right. But I mean, more and more. Go ahead, Andy.
No, I think what's going on, and you and I talk with a lot of customers during our our day, and what's happening, and I'm going to phrase someone who told me this. I am a believer of EDR, right? So someone told me I'm a believer of EDR, and the concept was, and this was a POC that Larry is aware that we're running, and when you see a ransomware hit a customer, and you see that the FortiEDR is preventing that from happening. Of course, as as a technology advisor, that's great for us, but it's a scare. It's really scared, and people is realizing that even if you think that your risk culture, whatever, as an organization, you may not want that right now. I will tell you that this is one of the most effective tools to reduce the amount of damage that the ransom can make, right? Because we were talking about time to reaction, right? The time to reaction is going to pretty much, if you discover this from the get-go, whenever it started at the computer level, you're really allowing the people who needs to react to that to prevent lateral move, to prevent them removing the backups of your organization, from prevent them to privilege escalation, all that stuff that can happen when a ransomware hits you. When you have EDR, right at the moment that malware tries to execute, is preventing it from doing it. It doesn't let it run, which is everything in the time frame that we just described. If you have an EPP today that it doesn't recognize that fileless attempt, look at the amount of time they can do all this.
Yeah, you're out of luck. It's too late. I mean,
Too late.
What's the dwell time for ransomware? It's you see it's hitting. Once it's made it past AV, you see it hit, and then bam, it's encryption. So yeah, I guess dwell time is seconds there. It's not the year of it just floating around there. It's seconds. Okay, and then it's moving laterally, and it's hitting everybody. Look at, I think it was Garmin is the most recent one, right? $10 million, I think, that publicly they've said. They've not said that they've spent that, but it's the rumor is they've spent $10 million. It's what's in the news, to get their files back. But it also impacted the entire services that they provide, right? Phone, not phones, but watches and navigational systems in the ocean were down, right? So.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Larry, because when I was referring back to this article, the hits are a lot of IoT and a lot of wearables, point of sale devices, and some of those, the endpoint protection, just the traditional EPP won't really protect you, and that's why I think and I like the title of the slide, the evolution, because it is an evolution over the last several years of actually paying more attention to the observance of behaviors. And so we have a great question. Why do we need both? And the answer is it depends. And I want Andy and Larry to jump on this. My answer would be probably yes.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
I would say yes. And Larry knows this. I'm a believer that you need both.
Yeah, I think you do.
Yeah, it's like it's like you when you play soccer, right? You can have Messi, scoring, which is the best player, by the way. But you can have Messi scoring, but then if you have a horrible goalkeeper, right? This is not going to work, right? So you have to have each of these products if you talk about the overall portfolio and how you position these products, to me, if you can have both, for sure. If you can have both, because that will give you the best value to protect your organization. That's my comment on that.
Well, and EPP is so
Yes.
EPP is so it's overarching, but I think of it just EPP in general as AV, right? I guess that's the common factor. A lot of the EPP vendors, whether it's the first generation stuffs like McAfee, Symantec, Trend, right? They offer a lot of things. They'll offer VPN, they'll offer disk, endpoint encryption. They'll offer all of these things. So that kind of falls under EPP. I think of EDR as really that defense against malware, right? Just all things malware, right? The exfiltration, the ransomware, Trojans, that sort of things, right? That's what I view as EDR, right? Where they're doing that type of reconnaissance with pieces of software.
I would say that this is an area in security that the definitions are everywhere, right? If you talk about the next generation AV or EPP or EDR, all the products have like a weird kind of situation. Thus, it's good that we're having this conversation, because one vendor can call next generation B, that the other vendor will call EPP, that the other vendor will call the EDR advanced or super advanced EDR or whatever. So all these definitions are complicated, even for us as security. That we work in security, so can you imagine for the customer, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's get it going.
Right.
So Jonathan is asking another question.
Yes, and we have a number of times that we've done proof of concepts and actually stopped an attack while we were doing the proof of concept. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's so scary, having that situation, right? So, but let's talk now. Let's go through the theory. We're talking about definitions of how this works. This is the anatomy of a ransomware attack. This is a normal scenario. This is not every single scenario, but this is the normal scenario about ransomware. And we want to put this in front of you so you remember how ransomware works. And the other thing that we want you to know is look at all the things that need to happen for a ransomware to be successful, right? There's a lot of things that need to happen for a ransomware to be successful. So first, you're going to receive an email, maybe it's a phishing email that is, trying to download the malware or to visit the site to get that malware. At that point, the malware will get to your computer. That malware will not execute immediately, right? That's to encrypt your hard drive. What it's going to try to do, first of all, is going to try to do some communication home. That's the CSC communication in step number 4, to try to talk to whoever the bad guy is. Then what it's going to try to do is going to try to move laterally. It's going to try to recognize your shared drives, trying to see where it can go. So there's going to do a lot of analysis and gathering and reconnaissance on your network before even encrypting your computer. When the person finishes that, what it's going to do is going to download the public key, and it's going to encrypt your hard drive. At that moment, you're encrypted. And then this is the step number 6, that your computer at that point and whatever other infrastructure this person got, it got encrypted. So look at all the things that needs to happen before even that computer got encrypted. All the communications, the malware execution, the communications with the CSC. I know how that key needs to happen to be in your machine for the encryption. And with that, I would like to pass it to Larry, because Larry has a good couple of ideas to present FortiEDR to you guys and also explain how it can help. So Rachel is asking, will this solution prevent the most recent ransomware? So I don't know if you remember these guys, but do you remember that ransom that it was a VM running like from Oracle VM, like an Oracle VM that was mapping your hard drive and executing a ransom against that? I know, Larry, you and I talk about this.
Yeah, so if it goes through the kernel, which it will, we'll stop it, right? You've got to call on the kernel level method calls for encryption, and that's where we shine. That question is actually it's a perfect segue into my slides. So first things first, if it's known, if it's a known bad behavior, we will absolutely catch it, right? So from an AV perspective, this is what we're talking about when we think of pre-infection. So take that ransomware question. If it's something that we've seen out in the wild, Locker Goga, most recently, WannaCry, if it's got that sort of if it's got all those variables, we're going to catch it on a pre-infection side. We've got a next-gen AV. What I call that is an algorithm that tries to predict if the incoming file is malicious or not, right? Not so reliant on just a hash database. Think first generation AV. So first generation AV, if the hash is in there, it's bad, right? It's very binary. With the algorithm, you're less reliant on that, so you've got a better efficacy. So NSS Labs ranks our next-gen AV one of the best out there. They gave 3 vendors a AA rating. We were one of them. So from a prevention standpoint, it's great, right? So that's known bad behavior. That's not a true 0-day. So let's just take that Garmin example. I haven't really done much research on this except for what I've seen in the news. But let's just say it was a 0-day. Let's just say it was an unknown, unnamed, whatever, right? What it's going to do, we probably would have missed that on that filtering known bad had we been in the environment. But fear not, we would have caught it in the post-infection. So post-infection, this is where EDRs are come into play. EDRs, Endpoint Detection and Response, right? The world of EDR is all about collecting a massive amounts of data and running it against all these IOCs and determining if you've got something to really worry about. A lot of alerts, a lot of all of that's popping up, but it's usually after the fact, right? After the fact of AV. If your AV has been beaten, you've now got to do the threat hunting to find all this. We've taken a completely different approach. We're not collecting and storing this massive amounts of data. We don't have a proprietary storage that does the algorithm against the data. It's very simple. We have enumerated at the kernel level for the OSs we support. That's Windows XP, Service Pack 2 to present, Windows 2003 Server to present, things on Linux and Mac, right? At the kernel level, we've enumerated every single method call that malware has ever tried to use for those OSs. So what I mean by that is if you try to process hop, if you try to escalate privileges, if you try to move laterally, if you try to harvest credentials, if you try to encrypt the hard disk, we're talking about ransomware today. So if you try to encrypt the hard disk, you have to follow the rules of the operating system and you have to call in those kernel level method calls for encryption. No other way around it. Good or bad, right? I know you're immediately thinking, well, what about a false positive, right? What about BitLocker? What about endpoint encryption tool? All of that, right? Well, we would, in theory, block on that. So we have to create an exception. We do that primarily through our cloud, right? So we're very different. By design, we block first, and you have to prove you're trustworthy. So we'll auto-generate an exception for the likes of BitLocker and endpoint encryption automatically in our POC, right? We'll identify that. It's automatically done. There may be some manual exceptions that need to be created because we've just never seen that application for for millions of customers. But if that's the case, you just create that manual exception, and then we block all encryption beyond that. So the case in point, or to answer the specific question around do you stop all the modern day ransomware? Well, all ransomware has to do encryption. If you call in those method calls, you're going to get blocked. So we've not had a single customer be impacted by ransomware, period, since our version 1 of our product. That's the secret sauce. That's where our 9 patents are at.
Something to say about that, and this is very important, is you need to have the right configuration for that, right? Because if you create an exception to allow, right?
yes, PowerShell. Don't
we have seen that, right? People say, "Can we authorize that?" No, we don't want that, right? This is why you have the tool, right? This is why you are deploying this.
Don't whitelist PowerShell.
Oh, there's a question there.
That's a good one. It's from a stats perspective. Andy, you were just pulling up a bunch of stuff from SANS. Was that something that was covered more recently?
Yeah, it was talking about, it was like 80% get infected without an EDR solution. It didn't say how often, but that was over the course of 2019. 80% of them were infected without an EDR, which goes back to that whole evolution, right? It goes back to what you're talking about in that being able to stop it within a second or two, recognizing the behavior and stopping it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So from a
I think Larry's got one more.
from an incident response perspective, think about this. Think about this. If the audience are security engineers and they're out there doing a lot of threat hunting and all of that, or they're out there, getting their AVs getting beaten. Well, think about coming in the next day and looking at the alert, and there's something trapped in containment that wasn't allowed to write to disk, wasn't allowed to get a network or socket right at the kernel level. But it's sitting there and it looks really nasty. It's malicious. Well, you can go in there and manually delete the file, clean up any persistent data, update the registry, stop the process, all of that. Or you can actually do it in an automated fashion, right? That's where our playbooks come into play. So we talk about EDRs. Dwell time is the enemy of all EDRs. I really do have this theory that ransomware is just I don't have any proof, but it's my theory that ransomware is really just the aftermath of a data exfil attack, right? They're just destroying everything to show that they've stole all this intellectual property. We see more data exfil attacks because again, we've enumerated at the kernel level all those method calls for both socket access at the kernel level as well as write to disk, right? So we see way more data exfil attacks than we do ransomware. Ransomware, when we see it, we stop it. It's gone, right? We can delete and we can get rid of it. But data exfil, that's what we see the vast majority of. So go ahead and go to the next slide. But yeah, so we have zero dwell time, right? So we're going to in the beginning, we're going to prevent with one of the best prevention mechanisms out there, or the next gen AV, right? 99.x. I'm not going to say it's perfect because it's an algorithm that tries to predict previously known bad behavior. But if anything makes it past there, again, it's going to get trapped in containment because we've enumerated at the kernel level every single method call for malware. If you use it, you're going to get blocked, right? You're going to be trapped in containment. We're a firewall for the kernel. And then we're going to automatically delete the file, clean up any persistent data, update the registry, terminate processes. And now, of course, now that we're part of Fortinet, we're going to auto-generate a rule in the FortiGates to block that IP if it's a malicious command and control or some sort of lateral movement. So yeah, it's a complete closed loop process, and it's been a fun ride working for this company because we get to go in and do a lot of breach assessments. Looks like we got a question for false positive handle. That's a great question. So our cloud, all of our customers, we're seeing the exceptions that are being manually created as well as the ones that we know or need to be created, right? So for false positives, because we are connected to the cloud, we're going to auto-generate those exceptions in real time as we see them, especially for known good, right? We have an algorithm that tries to decide if this is, if Google comes out with a new Chrome update that does log encryption, as an example, that if you're the first person, that's going to be a false positive. But as that starts to move throughout our cloud infrastructure from all of our other customers, we're going to say, wait, nope, this is legit. Let's dial it down, right? Let's go ahead and allow it, and we're going to auto-generate those exceptions. That's how we deal with false positives. Very minimal false positives. Even NSS Labs gave us high ranks on that.
Good answer that. And also, I will tell you that in our way of deploying this product is, of course, we sit with sometime with the customer, going, maybe for a couple of weeks to just visit the events that the FortiEDR will present, and we will work with them. Is this a real exception? This is a real thing. And in some cases, why this user is doing here this thing, you should not be doing that. So we discover even fun stuff like that.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so let's close with some takeaways, guys. Okay, so the first one is, one of the questions was there, and this is mine. So this is my personal opinion. Is in my humble opinion, in security, you need both. They do both give you the best protection. They both work together to give you both the prevention, detection, and response that you need to better protect your organization. That will be my first takeaway. The second one is that we need to remember that ransomware at the very end always starts with that malware. And that malware, even if it's a 0-day and it is trying to do something that is recognized by the super patents that the FortiEDR has, is going to prevent even the malware, not the ransomware that comes after, but even the malware from executing and trying to do things they should not. Let's go through it. So Tim has a question. How does EDR address a situation where the attack comes from a third-party device on my network? So the first question I will ask you, Tim, is why you have a third-party device connected to the same LAN that the rest of the devices. You should never have that in the same segment. You know, that's a kind of a network segmentation, and we can talk about Fortinet for that, probably for another half an hour.
Yep.
But the very important thing is, one, you should not have. But let's say that for some reason you have that device. That device is going to try to communicate and trying to implant the malware on your device, and it's trying to execute. At the moment that malware tries to execute, this is going to put the jail around that process and will not do it nothing. It will not be able to do nothing at all. Nothing at all. It doesn't matter where it's coming. Internet, from your LAN. It doesn't matter how that malware got there. This will protect your device and protect the network.
Yeah. And with our orchestration, we can auto-generate that rule on the FortiGates. If you're a FortiGate shop, we can do it on the API level to auto-generate that rule on whatever your network or your firewall is, right? So we can do that to protect those third-party assets that may not have this agent on it. That's one way of doing it too.
Yeah, Andy, this is yours.
So the third one, the cost of endpoint protection is much less than the cost of recovery. When you start looking at the average cost of ransomware, and people come up and say, well, that's great and it's probably needed, but we can't afford it. And my question is always the same. Do you have the money right now to go pay for the ransom? Because when you start comparing it, it's going to be a lot less expensive to put your endpoint protection and to Andy's point, that's both endpoint protection and the EDR. That is both. You're actually going to save your company money by doing that. And Larry, I think you had the last takeaway, and then we do have a question there. That'll be part of your takeaway.
Yeah, I mean, EDR is it is a must. I mean, look, with all of the ransomware in the news, if we can stop all ransomware, I mean, it makes it a no-brainer, right? It is part of a defense and depth security strategy. But for that last question, how do we compare with other EDR vendors? It's very simple. It's the post-infection containment. Again, we've enumerated at the kernel level every single method call that malware has ever tried to use for those kernels we support. That we've done all the work that you would buy a threat hunter or a threat hunting service for. That you have to manage all of that data with an EDR. We are very lightweight, and that is the difference. That's the difference. It's the blocking post-infection. Nobody else has that. That's where our core intellectual property is. That's where our 9 patents are, and that's why Stanley Black & Decker, as an example, with the reference to the founder, had 50,000 endpoints, and they moved from a traditional EDR that had 6 FTEs working around the clock in a SOC to 1 FTE that works part-time in our solution, right? They were able to allocate those resources to other tasks, right? It's security, so there's plenty for them to do. But the endpoint was not one of them.
Yeah. Well, with that, I think we're done for today. Thank you so much. This has been great. I really enjoy our videos with Andy and Larry. Looking forward to hear from the audience. Send us an email to connect@Meriplex if you have questions about the product or how we manage the product for you. And again, thank you guys and have a great weekend.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks so much.